Metro Atlanta has become the nation's 8th largest metropolis by population. 50 miles northeast of the city lies Lake Lanier, one of the largest man-made reservoirs in the country. Being that the state of Georgia has no natural lakes, they needed to build a reservoir away from Atlanta for its municipal purposes. Around 70% of Metro Atlanta's population relies on Lake Lanier and the Chattahoochee River for its drinking water and industrial needs. The lake was built back in the 1950s, and the lake has been mired in controversy ever since. Prior to the construction of the lake lie several small towns and even an all-black city called Oscarville. We'll get to that city in a minute. But Lake Lanier was built on land that's mostly rolling hills up in northeast Georgia. Metro Atlanta and the northern half of Georgia lie in what's called the Piedmont region. Lots of rolling hills, uneven terrain, creeks, rivers, forest. Lake Lanier is not only one of the nation's biggest reservoirs, it's also one of the deadliest. Up to this point, we've had around 700 plus fatalities associated with that lake. Many drownings, boat crashes, and even people that didn't drown in the lake say when they're swimming in it, it feels like something is pulling them down. Now, being that the lake was built over small towns and even a small black city, it's a lot of things that remain under that water that they never got rid of, such as an old race car track called Looper Speedway. There are sunken boats and ropes and nets and submerged tree trunks that weren't fully cut down and dug up. And many people actually believe the lake is haunted. There were up to hundreds of ancient burial grounds that were never fully located and never exhumed to remove the bodies and move them to another location. One of the more interesting stories was of Delia Parker and her friend Susie Roberts. Delia Parker and Susie Roberts were both in their 20s. Two young white women headed to a North Georgia town called Dawsonville. They never made it to Dawsonville. Rumor has it that the young ladies went to a gas station, did not pay, sped off, and within a few miles traveling on Highway 53, all was left was skid marks on the road, and they could only assume that the car skidded off the road and went into the lake. Now, when the lake opened in 1958, there were swimmers that said they actually saw a ghostly figure roaming around the lake, and this ghostly figure had on a blue dress just like Delia Parker was wearing the night of that horrific crash. This ghostly figure was even described as missing both hands and 2 toes. This ghostly figure was known as the Lady of the Lake. And finally, a fisherman noticed a body floating in the lake who had no hands and 2 toes missing and wearing a badly decomposed blue dress. It wouldn't be until 32 years later, when they were dredging a section of the lake to put a new bridge in, that they found the car that the 2 women were driving that fateful night in the 1950s. They could only assume that this was the car driven by Delia Young and Susie Roberts, because some human remains were found in the driver's seat. The remains were laid to rest in the nearby cemetery. Now let's talk about Oscarville, Georgia. Oscarville was an all-black town of a little bit over 1,000 people. And of course, this was in the Jim Crow South. The town existed up until 1912. It was a thriving black town for that time period, and that part of Georgia wasn't known for having such a large black population. And of course, it was segregated. So the black folks had their own businesses, schools, churches, etc. And all of a sudden, there was a situation where 2 white women on 2 separate occasions were found raped and physically abused really badly, one of them almost to the point where she was thought to be dead. So, as was done in those evil times, a group of white angry men would come together and they would round up at least 5 black men, lynching 2 of them. One of them was lynched before he even was taken out of the jailhouse. After the conviction and lynching of these black men, the city of Oscarville was completely destroyed. All the black people that were left behind were forced to leave. If they didn't leave, they were murdered. The city was burnt to the ground, and everything that was left of value was taken. Oscarville, Georgia did exist in a place called Forsyth County, which is to the north of Atlanta, about 30 miles north of downtown. Lake Lanier is partially split between Hall and Forsyth counties. Forsyth is to the west, Hall is to the east. A portion of the lake also touches Gwinnett, Lumpkin, and Dawson counties, but it's mainly between Forsyth and Hall counties. About 60% of the lake is in Hall, about 30% is in Forsyth, and about 5% is in Gwinnett. And Forsyth County, Georgia has remained a hotbed for racism and white supremacy all the way up into the 2000s, when it became a sprawling suburb of metro Atlanta. It is now one of the wealthiest counties in the nation, and in the 80s, the racism was on full display.
In a scene that looked like something out of America's darker past. Forsyth County's been all white for decades, and many residents say they want to keep it that way.
We haven't had none up here since the first of the century, and I don't think we've done okay without them, and I don't believe we need them up here now.
All these people out here marching today, the black people and the white black people too, all they up here for to start trouble. And they come to the right place to get it.
God bless America! Keep Forsyth County white!
So there you have it, people. That was the old Forsyth County, Georgia. This is what Forsyth County, Georgia looks like now. It is a sprawling suburb, like I said, one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. Population of around 250,000. And a lot of people have bought homes on Lake Lanier. And yes, Lake Lanier now covers up the remains of Oscarville, Georgia, where the black people were forced to flee from. That's why a lot of black people feel the ancestors are drowning people on that lake. Don't know how true that is, but the lake definitely has some issues. It is the wealthiest county in Georgia, like I said, and one of the 20 wealthiest counties in the country. And as we all know, the lake has been rocked with dozens and dozens of tragedies since the lake was built. Every year we lose about a dozen people, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. One of the most high-profile deaths, the son of Usher's ex-wife, Tamika Foster. His name was Kyle. He was killed on Lake Lanier. He was struck by a jet ski. Rest in peace to that young soul and all the other hundreds of souls that have been taken away by this lake. Some people believe the lake is haunted, like I said, but in a lot of these incidents, alcohol is involved. You got a lot of people that use that lake. It's one of the most visited lakes in the country. Almost 10 million visitors annually. One of the busiest lakes in the South. And you just had a lot of freak accidents over the years. Just recently, you had a man who was electrocuted to death swimming in the lake. I guess it was a power box still on. You've had, a few boat fires just randomly happen. If you're into the superstitious stuff, maybe the lake is haunted. I would not swim in that lake though, because like I said earlier in the video, there's a lot of underwater hazards that you can't see. The water is murky. It looks blue from the surface, but the visibility under the surface is just not clear at all. I would not jump off my boat into that water. It is not like the ocean. There's all kind of debris under that water. Your feet can get entangled. I don't care how good you can swim. Don't play with that lake. Do not try to swim in it. We just recently had a young man drown. He jumped off a boat. He was in his early 20s, It's just not a safe lake for swimming in the middle of the lake. The lake gets really, really deep in some spots. Some spots it can go up to 100+ feet, but the average depth of the lake is around 60 to 70 feet. But people are not going to stop using the lake because the metro Atlanta population is around 6.1 million. We're a very large metropolis now. People get married on that lake. People have birthday celebrations on the lake. My father just celebrated his 65th birthday on a party boat, and I attended, but I didn't get off the boat. I stayed on the boat. And there's a few beach areas set up. People go out there, have their cocktails, get their drink on. And if you're going to ever visit Lake Lanier, do not drink and drive your boat if you have a boat or a jet ski, because you can be charged with what's called a BUI, boating under the influence. And because it's so many people, crashes do happen, and sometimes those crashes can be fatal. And that's what's causing a lot of the deaths. But if you are a person that believes the lake is haunted, you won't be going there anyway. And just a little fun fact for a lot of people who may care to know this information. Lake Lanier is not the deadliest lake in the nation. It's one of them. The deadliest lake in the nation is actually Lake Michigan. It is substantially larger, like 400 times larger. It is a natural lake, unlike Lake Lanier. And it also is responsible for, I think, well over 10 to 20,000 deaths since they start keeping record of it. It's very strong rip currents on that lake, and sometimes there are just super huge waves. Like I said, Lake Lanier had a lot of cities and towns that existed before the lake was built, and that's a picture of the Looper Speedway during a time of drought. It got exposed. Old boats have been pulled from underneath that water. You just don't know what lies beneath. Yes, there could be human remains under there. Yes, there are old towns and tree stumps and just all kind of hazards. So the lake is not to be played with. Enter it at your own risk. Thank y'all for watching. Let me know what y'all think about Lake Lanier.